All right, and can everyone hear me all right? Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so what this presentation is a partial on a course that I took with Angular Architect Accelerator, mostly going into architecting Angular apps using monorepos. So there's actually been a few changes in Angular and in NX, which is the main thing that I've been using for creating these monorepos. So I'm going to go into those a little bit, but then just get into some basics of some monorepos and then some architecture examples to kind of help make things easier when you're doing a monorepo. Is anyone unfamiliar with the monorepo? Right,
Yeah, I'm
so,
unfamiliar with it, Jared.
all right, let me touch on that a little bit. So monorepos are a kind of a collection of, actually, I have a couple slides with this, so I'll just get right to that. But I'll touch on it with a little more detail since we do have some people who aren't familiar with monorepos. So basically, a monorepo is just a source control repository that contains code for multiple projects. So it's very a lot of people get it confused with a monolith, and it's very code heavy. It can be a very dense base, but it's used by a whole lot of companies. Google being the prime example uses a monorepo. So the difference between a monorepo and a monolith is a monorepo is a repository that contains code for multiple independent projects. So even though the projects are stored in the same code repository under the same source control, they do not interact with each other directly. As far as it's not just one big mess of code, one conglomeration of code, where like a monolith, you really have it's also a very large code base, but the everything's kind of divided into sub projects or one large project, and everything's very, very intertwined. The biggest advantage to having everything in a monolith is just all your code is right there. I mean, you get it started, you get everything going, and if you make any changes, you know what's being affected, that kind of thing. And you get some of those benefits with a monorepo, but you still get the independence of creating your projects as if you're creating each project one at a time. So whether it's a good idea or a bad idea isn't necessarily it's like anything else. I mean, there's patterns in creating code and how you create your architecture, but there's no real rules. You want to follow the pattern that's kind of best for your situation. So it can be a very good idea if you have multiple projects that you want to kind of build together that have similar code base or can share code. It also gives you a single source of truth, so that you have your all your code is just in one spot. The other way of kind of doing sharing your code is creating shared packages, so you can have multiple packages that are out, and you have that's easier in some ways, but then you also have version controls and things like that you have to worry about. So if you create a package for UI components, for instance, and you make a change to one of those components, then you don't necessarily have to worry about breaking everything that everything else in your code base, because they can just use that older version. And so as people update, then they can update to a newer version. But then you have all of your code is on different versions. So it makes upgrading a little bit harder, especially if some things kind of get behind. And then you have major changes to make big upgrades and that kind of thing. Where if you keep everything in a monorepo, then you don't have the different versions. What you do have is just that single source of truth that you are pulling everything from. And you still get the same benefits as far as creating like NPM packages and shared packages, where you can use the benefits to kind of keep your code dry and share and reuse code easily. So the other benefit of the monorepo is you do, by necessity, have increased team collaboration, and this is one of the things that is really seen as a negative and a positive when you're dealing with monorepos, is that you have everybody's forced to be on the same page, essentially. So even though you can create packages, UI components, different libraries that are independent and just specific for one application, and then all of your shared packages, libraries, everything like that doesn't necessarily have to be used by other people on your project. Since you are using that same repository, that collaboration is necessary. And there are tools with Git and IDEs where you can create different workspaces so that you don't necessarily need to pull down all the code or view all the code in your sidebar, for instance. So that if you have something like Google, where you'd have just an unimaginable amount of code, you wouldn't be able to really work with that. You can have things, just there's the tooling set up just so you can pull down just like, this is what's specific to me. But at the same time, everything is still in that monorepo, and you can run tests and things like that. And if you make any changes, it becomes pretty obvious to know really quickly how those changes affect one project. For instance, just in a simplest example, when you build your code, if you made changes that broke another project, that project will be broken, and that would be obvious. And also tests that you can put in for the code will also note that things have been broken. And obviously that depends on the level of the tests and the quality of the tests that you write. But that's another aspect of creating a monorepo, is you do want to do tests. And one of the Angular itself is built to run as a monorepo. The default from the CLI is not to do it, but it is very easy to set up Angular as a monorepo so that you have a project and then you have your applications in your project. So that's something that I have tried off and on while I've done Angular to some success. And one of the biggest issues that you have with that is everything is very independent when you're using the Angular CLI alone, just to create the monorepo. And one of there's a tooling out there, a company, Narwhal, that has its own CLI that's based on top of the Angular CLI. Theirs is NX, and that's in my opinion, and a lot of the places, pretty much most of the places that build Angular monorepos use something like NX. Google has its own custom tooling that it uses on top of the Angular CLI. So they don't use NX, but they have their own little secret sauce thing, and it's built for that huge level of complexity. And if you're using, trying to build something that big, this isn't the way you want to go anyway. But with a project that has a few different apps that can be run together, one of the simplest examples would be if you have a client app, which is sort of a customer facing application, and then you also have an admin app that's kind of running side by side, and they're using two different consumers. You have your customer, and then you have your customer service, or your whatever team that is using the admin app to kind of look in and see what's happening. And those are going to use a lot of the same features, a lot of the same database endpoints, a lot of the same services. And that's something that you'd easily do just by running two separate projects and a library, or two separate apps in an Angular monorepo. And that's, if we have time, I don't know if I have time, but I'll try and go into some examples on how to do that. So NX is another thing with NX that I wanted to touch on real quickly. First, does that kind of answer everyone's questions on monorepos?
Yeah, answered mine. Thank you.
Okay. So one of the real benefits of NX too is it does have a little flexibility, especially lately. They've acquired a couple companies that did kind of package-based monorepos, and they've increased their ability to just run everything as you would for a package, but instead of creating your packages, so your shared packages as separate repositories, you'd create them as your own, as in one repository, basically. It adds a lot of flexibility. It's the way a lot of things are done already, so there really isn't there isn't more learning that needs to be involved. There isn't a learning curve involved in it. All the tooling and everything is done essentially the same. So the only difference is, instead of creating a new repository, you just add a new package to your monorepo, and it keeps it just very simple, and that's built in. The one that I'm going to go into a little bit more in depth on is the integrated monorepo, and that's kind of the classic monorepo that I was just talking about. And then there is one other option, one thing about NX that I wanted to touch on real quickly, because it's very helpful if you're not interested in using a monorepo, or if your project just doesn't require a monorepo because you just want one app. So, and what that is just they have the ability now to do just a standalone app. So this is different than in Angular 14. Angular, they introduced the standalone component, and they solidified it in this recent version of Angular 15. It's not the same thing. And just to kind of give you a real quick example, I'm just going to go over this real quick. So with the standalone Angular app, or standalone in NX, so what you do is, I'm using npx because I don't actually have NX installed, just to give you an example on how to do that. So this is just the command. Can everyone see that? Is it big enough?
Yep.
All right, so it's just create NX workspace, and this is their latest version that has it. So you'd actually have to do at latest to get this at this particular point anyway. So, and that gives you a few options where you can create the package-based monorepo, the integrated monorepo, or a standalone React or Angular app. And the benefit you get from this is so we're going to name it school app. And the benefit you get from doing this, as opposed to just the Angular CLI, is it does a setup of Cypress and Jest and Prettier and ESLint. So Angular was pretty tightly developed with TSLint, which was deprecated a few years ago. And since Angular 12, they just completely got rid of any linting integration at all, which I have seen that create a huge amount of problems with not having any linting. JavaScript is it's like that Jurassic Park thing, you know, JavaScript finds a way. So it just wants to do something. I mean, and there's a lot of safety that's built into TypeScript by saying, yeah, this way isn't the right way, or you're going to cause issues. And without having any linting automatically built in, there's a lot of issues where your Angular apps will just run, but there's declarations that haven't been met. We just ran into an issue with someone very recently where they didn't declare a component, but they were calling the component from the router using the lazy load, which would work just fine, because lazy load is just that's a built-in part of TypeScript. That's not Angular specific, where the declare and import methods are part of Angular, and that created some issues as far as being able to use the selector. You can't use the selector if you don't have a component declared somewhere, and that's something that a linter would pick up, but JavaScript and TypeScript don't really care about it. So what you have here then, just that's all it took there. So everything's all set up with your with ESLint. You have your app just like you would with Angular CLI. Just a few differences, but essentially it's the same thing, but it just pre-configured all your Prettier and ESLint stuff for you. So the your package commands are a little bit different. Instead of ng, you just run nx. So you do an nx serve, nx build, nx test. I also have an nx format to get your Prettier and configure all that. So that's something that I think is pretty handy, even if you don't want to do monorepos just by using nx. But to continue on, so with the package-based monorepos, just want to go over something like that really quickly. Some of the things on there. So your package-based monorepo, as you saw in there, is one of the options. It's just a collection of node packages, and you do it the same way that you would if you were building those in separate repos. Everything is just managed with a package.json file, and everything works just as if each package was in its separate in a separate repo. So, and with this, you can host your packages on an npm registry, on Git, put them on a private registry, just like you would if you were creating your packages in a standalone repository, publishing them and importing them into your Angular project. And it gives you the flexibility of being able to do that while just kind of keeping everything under the same place, so that you have a little bit more control over the version control where everything is. You can see everything all at once, but it's still, everything is just really managed kind of independently, and you kind of work at it. You'd work with each of your apps and everything like that, just like it was. They were on separate repos, and you can build applications inside of a package-based monorepo, or you could create a package-based monorepo just for your npm packages, and then publish those and pull those into another Angular project. The one of the added benefits that you have of creating a monorepo is that you can actually modify the packages and build them as you are building your Angular app. So if you have a package that you want to share across multiple Angular apps, if you have those multiple Angular apps inside this monorepo, and it's a package-based monorepo, you can edit that particular package, and you'd be able to instantly create builds and use your development server to see what those changes are without having to go through all the process and steps of publishing your package or building your package and importing it into your Angular app by some other method. And it can really speed up your development process, and doesn't really change anything over that traditional way of sharing code across multiple Angular application. So, but the one that I wanted to get into the most is the integrated monorepo. And what that does is everything is set up so there are no versions. So if you modify a particular library that is used by multiple apps, and it causes a breaking change in one of your apps, then that's something that would have to be addressed right there, because there isn't a version that you can use of your library, of an older version of that particular library that's still workable. Everything is current. And that again has one of the big trade-offs of the benefit of everything being current, and the downside of being you need to upgrade everything all at the same time. And a lot of that choice of whether you want to use a monorepo or not is really dependent upon that one question, as far as how much do you want to keep everything upgraded and current as far as if things change. And that doesn't mean you can't create a new library and leave an old one just kind of left alone, because it's, you have like 3 or 4 apps that are using it, and those apps don't need upgraded, and so they're just being kind of standard held in place as a status quo. Then you have some newer apps that need more functionality. You could create a different version of that library, call it something else, and use that instead. And that also gets a little bit messy, and one of those questions where you might better be served by going with just your regular kind of npm packages rather than kind of an integrated monorepo. So this is what I found as being the biggest reason why people don't use these big integrated monorepos, is when you're starting to get some level of complexity and you need to upgrade everything, then it can be a pretty big headache. So here is a little diagram of an example of what a simple monorepo could look like with with just having 2 apps. So you have your classroom and your classroom admin app. So the classroom app can work just like your regular app, have a couple feature modules, and then you would be able to share libraries. One of the patterns that was discussed in this course was being able to use a library that's specific, putting everything out into a library that you could, but making it specific to a particular app. So on this diagram, you'd notice that that in the library folder, the libs folder, there's a classroom app and a classroom admin folder, and then also a shared folder. So in the classroom app, you can put your specific services or UI components, models, anything really that is just for that app. One of the other benefits that you can get with using CLI tooling like NX is there's the ability to create tags inside your projects where you can put in linter rules for particular libraries. For instance, if the classroom app was trying to import a library from the classroom admin specific libraries, then you get an error that wasn't allowed. That those are specific to that one app. Also being able to set up rules so that you're not importing things in multiple places, or they're not being imported in a circular fashion, which can create its own different level of problems. So creating an integrated app, as you can kind of see with what we had before, is very similar. So we do a npx create nx workspace at latest, and we just get the same options as far as being able to create an integrated monorepo. There are with NX multiple options as far as what it has with pre-built integrated monorepos. The Nest is very helpful. If any of you are Angular developers want to be able to quickly create kind of a JavaScript based, TypeScript based backend, Nest is awesome. It's Angular like and has a whole lot of built-in things as far as database integrations, token management, authentication. It's obviously something that I can't get into here, but I'd recommend looking into it if you want to do any kind of full stack development. And then using NX to create an integrated Angular app and then adding a Nest backend on top of it gives you the options of creating a kind of a backend, front end, all together in one repository, which is also kind of nice. So that way, any kind of changes you make right there to your backend can be immediately made to your front end as well. And it becomes obvious that you're not going to have any kind of breaking changes from one to the other because they're just so tightly coupled together. And that's obviously not something that's going to work in a lot of cases because you're running a .NET or Java or some other kind of backend. But in a smaller project or one that wanted to use a kind of a custom JavaScript based backend, that's a pretty good option. So we'll take the repository name, we'll just call it school, create a classroom application. What this does is it just creates our first application. And I'm going to get into this just a little bit later as far as what the distributing caching is. But for right now, I'll just select no. And what this will do is the same kind of thing that happened with creating your with the CLI project, except this is just going to format and set up all the Monorepo architecture and everything for you, as well as the ESLint, Cypress, and your testing environment, things like that. So if you can see that, what we have here is the project structure is a little bit different than what you're probably used to with Angular CLI. We have an apps folder. In the Angular CLI, when you create a monorepo, they call this project instead of apps. So NX names it apps. Your library folder, your libs folder, which is the same as with the monorepo structure with the Angular CLI. And there isn't anything in there. The classroom app has created a Cypress end-to-end test automatically for us. So it's got a lot of things already set up and configured. We're not going to get into that, but if you're interested in doing testing, Cypress is slick, and you can add that right in with your unit tests using Jest or Karma. The default with NX is Jest, but it does give you the option of selecting Karma. So you have that. If you're used to doing testing with Karma and Angular, that's really nice. A lot of React people, or if you're learning both React and Angular, or using both of them, it's nice to actually just use Jest, because it's a lot of people know how to do it, how to use it. So, and they're not all that different, but that is an option as far as whichever one you wanted to do. So inside your classroom folder here, this is our classroom app. This is what you'd start to see as your just your similar to what you'd have with you were creating a classroom app with the Angular CLI. So I'm going to open up the package folder, because this doesn't create any scripts by default on on serving. Actually, we'll call that start. And we'll just make that NX serve. And we need to specify the name of the application here. So we're running NX serve here basically, and doing the same thing as like an ng serve, but because we're set up with multiple applications, we need to tell it what app that we're wanting to serve. So I can find my mouse here. Am I still on?
Yes, you are, Jared.
Yeah, you're still on.
Sorry. Finding mute is hard.
My mouse has disappeared. It is, I can see its effects, but it is invisible. Okay, there it is. Okay. This is so odd. All right. It kind of froze up for a second and then decided to get rid of my pointer. That's never happened to me before. So this is just the basic same thing you get when you start an Angular app with the CLI, just a welcome screen basically thing, how you'd kind of do it. So that's not what I want. So one of the things that I have here, if I can, is I have an NX extension for VS Code, which makes things just a little simpler as far as generating new libraries, components, applications, things of that nature. So I just click generate, and this is the command for generating an application. And this right here is the code that you could type in the CLI that would just create an application. So it's just a kind of schematic to get to the CLI. So the other thing it does here is it actually is doing a dry run, a real quick. If this is visible, I have it zoomed in pretty tight, so I'm hoping you can see it. But you can just see that it's doing this command here with a dry run. So just kind of showing you what it would create. This is also that gives you some options here, so you can actually specify, the style. If there's a directory, something that you want to do. When creating multiple apps in the repository, is set up a different port for each one. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to run them at the same time, and it'll give you an error the same way you do with the regular Angular CLI, and telling you that this port is in use and you like to use another one. But this way you can just set it up so that it automatically runs each app on its own kind of individual port. You could also check the testing you want, if you want, or if you wanted it all. So Cypress and Protractor are built in as the tools. You can also choose your ESLint and say we want to generate a routing module just like you would with the Angular. It does also give you the option for a standalone, creating a standalone component-based app, and where you can add tags to. So, for instance, we might want to say this is a type app. And then again, you can use go back to Karma if you want to use Karma instead. And none of this has actually been run. It's just in the terminal here. It's just going through and doing a dry run flag here. And this is your command that you're running. It looks a little bit better if it's not quite as zoomed in. So if you're running this on your own computer, you can see this a little bit better. But what you just have here is this is just the command you do in the CLI. If you don't have this extension installed, would just be the NX generate at narwhal Angular application, the name of the application, port 4210, you want routing and tags. And if we run that, then we have a whole new app. And it's also, if you can notice right there, it's also created a the Cypress end-to-end version of the app. And I'm do this really quick here. So there you do the same thing again as far as if you're running it, doing the Classroom admin. There's a whole lot here. I might have to follow this up with some different brown bags. So here's the Classroom admin component running. I stopped this one, so it's not there anymore. But you can see that's kind of what it's doing there. Real quickly, if we also wanted to, hopefully I don't click on anything really weird with not being able to see the mouse. So if we wanted to generate a library, this is the same thing that we do here. So basically just make a UI library. Okay, this is so weird. I apologize. All right, I was going to set this up to do that. There we go. So that's real simple. We created a library. So now we have a in our libs folder, we've got a UI and all the just a module for that for the UI right there. So something that's really nice that that you can do with this new version of Angular, and I want to show you this real quick, and then we'll be done. Let's take a couple minutes. If we want to generate a component, let's say we want to make a button component, we'd set that up in. We want to put that as part of the UI. We don't need to declare a module if we actually go ahead and tag it as a standalone component. And so by running that command there, and you can just see this is just that command. It's very, very simple. And now we have a button component in our libs folder. Now what we would need to do is in our main libs folder here, since we're not using a module, just real quickly, just we need to just export that. So now we're exporting the button component, and the path is the same because this is just a barrel file, and the path is already generated for you really quickly. So if we go to their Angular application, the admin application, so our app component, we would just need to import let's see. It wants us to say from. All right. I'm in the wrong directory, sorry. So, and our app module, since that, if that was a standalone component, we could do it that way. So since this is a standalone component, we're importing it here into this app module real quick. And we do not need to declare it because it is because it's a standalone component, but we do need to import it. And then we'd actually be able to use it inside our app. Sorry. And it would be called scroll button. So we'll just throw that on there real quick so you can just see it. It should just be right down here, button works. So I wanted to go a little bit into some of the other things they have as far as caching, formatting, and things of like that. But I think we're running out of time. Also, I'm going to just skip right here to the end here. Does anybody have any questions? All right, no questions.
Jared, what was your personal feeling about working with it? Did you like it? Would you do this going forward?
It is a very much how I felt about Angular JS when I was first introduced to it.
Really?
The first reaction is, this is wonderful. That is immediately followed by, this is the biggest junk and stuff I've ever met in my life, and I never want to use it again. But just kind of stuck with it, and it is wonderful. It is very nice. One of the issues that I've had with code is just making sure that everything's kind of separated so that you're separating the concerns. It's real easy to create an app where you just tie everything together and you got all of your stuff just there, and it's nice, and you built it real fast. But we have to realize that these apps are going to be updated, and they're going to be read a lot more and updated a lot more than they're written. So it takes a little bit more time to write it, but this makes it real easy for you to keep everything in its own little isolated spots, so that when you're updating little parts of code, you know where it's touching, and they're abstracted enough that it's easy to update, and they're abstracted enough that once you get your architecture set up, for instance, you can have your UI library where you can have some junior devs or some UI developers that are really good at design and CSS and HTML that don't know all of the logic and everything. They don't have to have any kind of interaction with that because everything's just right there in that one little part. And you can even set up your Visual Studio with a workspace that just pulls in that part for them. So as long as they have the parameters as far as, your inputs, outputs, or whatever you're doing for that, they can make all the changes they want. And that makes that really nice. So long answer, but yes, I would use it, and I am using it. We are actually in the process of moving everything over at the state of Utah into a Monorepo. We've got several Angular apps that are running, and if this works, it's not a foregone conclusion, but if it works, then we'll be able to just keep all of the Angular apps running in the same repository. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have questions. Thank you. Really great presentation. So the first question is, if we already have a project using Monorepo, and is it worth it to add the NX when the repository already exists?
There would be some complexity to adding it. Probably about the same as if you're adding it to an existing project. The benefit you really get from NX is your distributed caching, and how it does builds and everything. So everything is done once you build something. It knows that you've built it, and you don't have to build it again. So everything on your local machine will be just lightning fast after you do it once if it hasn't changed. So it'll only build the things that have been changed. The distributed caching is what NX is open source. And so how they kind of make their money is if you sign up for the distributed caching, once you get up past a certain level, then it just kind of shares that cache across to everywhere. They have their own little server that stores your caching, and then everything from a local build will store that on the cache, so that on that cache server, so that even a pipeline will run faster. So it can actually save you quite a bit of money if you're, instead of paying for all the pipeline processes, which is also an extra benefit. But then the other thing that is really big that I liked with NX over just the regular Angular CLI was the testing, not the testing, the being able to set up the tags and rules for which libraries can be used where, so that it's not just the Wild West of, where you're importing which library into what application. I have actually seen Monorepo projects in Angular where applications are being imported into other applications, and since they're all just JavaScript modules, I mean, it kind of works, but you create huge problems that way. So with the rules set up that you can't import an app into another app, you're not going to run into that kind of issues. So yes, I would say it'd be worth it.
Thank you. And also, I really like the plugin you add in the Visual Studio Code. It's really handy. Is that only based on the NX?
That one is. That is an NX specific plugin. I think it's actually developed by Narwhal. So you don't need it. All those commands are right there in the CLI, and you go to nx.dev, it'll show you what the commands are. It's just really quick, visual way to run those CLI commands.
Gotcha. Thank you.
I was actually going to ask this question, and then you talked about it a little bit, answering the last question about those rules to govern what can be imported to what applications, like from what library. can you talk a little bit more about how you are making those decisions as to what should be sectioned off from certain applications? Is that just to try to prevent the breaking change issues from being as severe? If you know that, like, hey, this library should be really for this app, we don't want to tie changes to this library into other things. Is that how you're making those decisions?
That is. So it's really just setting it up so that you're saying this particular part of the code is just for this app, and that gives you the ability to take your code and abstract it away from your application. When you're done with this, your applications are actually very small. The app components and everything themselves, so they're very simple to read, simple to look at, because all your business logic is also being, or the way I have been doing it, is you're exporting that also into facades or just services. So it is just specifically for that. Other than that, there's really no reason why another application couldn't use the library that was just designed specifically for that one. And in that case, that would be a good time to maybe take that out and put it into the shared, and then just make a couple refactor changes, and then you have that same library being shared across multiple apps. But that way you know that these ones are just specific to here. So it's more of a file structure thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And there are a few other rules as far as like with services, and like apps being imported into apps, where you do need to have having the rules followed does make it so the app actually runs. It's not just a file structure thing. So we're getting really close to 1 o'clock. So are there any other last minute questions, or should we I should let you guys go and get back to your regular day? And I'll turn this back over to Jen real quick. How about that?
That was a great presentation, Jared. I loved it. It's fantastic.
Well, thank you.
Thanks, Jared.
Thank you, Jared, and thank you everyone for joining us. We will get this recording uploaded to our STG YouTube channel within the next week. So thanks again.
Thanks, Jared. Really great.
Great job. Yeah, thanks, Jared.